A single dad saw little twin girls abandoned on the road on Christmas Eve, but when 5-year-old Faith whispered who really left them there and how long they'd been waiting in the freezing snow, his whole world shifted in ways he never saw coming. Before we continue, please tell us, where in the world are you tuning in from? We love seeing how far our stories travel. Michael Brennan had been driving these empty back roads for 3 hours, trying to escape the suffocating silence of another Christmas Eve alone, when his headlights caught something that made his blood run cold. 2 small figures, barely visible through the swirling snow, huddled together on the side of Route 47. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. The snow had been falling heavily for hours, and visibility was getting worse by the minute. But as his truck drew closer, his heart nearly stopped. They were children, 2 little girls in matching pink coats holding hands in the darkness, 20 miles from the nearest town. Michael slammed on his brakes, his truck sliding slightly on the icy road before coming to a stop. His hands were shaking as he threw the gear into park and turned on his hazard lights. Every instinct from his years as a sheriff's deputy kicked in at once. He grabbed his emergency flashlight and stepped out into the bitter wind. "Hey there," he called out softly, not wanting to frighten them. The smaller girl was crying, her whole body shaking, while her sister had an arm wrapped protectively around her. "Are you okay? Where are your parents?" The braver twin looked up at him with enormous brown eyes that held a fear no child should ever have. Snow had gathered in her dark hair, and her lips were turning blue from the cold. "Our aunt, she said to wait here," the girl said, her voice barely audible over the wind. "She said someone would come for us."
Michael felt his stomach drop as he scanned the desolate road. There were no houses for miles, no broken-down cars, no sign of any adult anywhere. Just woods, darkness, and the relentless snow. The nearest home was at least 2 miles away, and in this weather, that might as well have been 20. "Sweetheart, how long have you been waiting here?" The quieter twin finally spoke, her voice so small he had to lean in to hear her. Since the sun was up." The words hit Michael like a physical blow. He glanced at his watch. It was past 7 in the evening. These children had been abandoned on the side of the road for over 8 hours, on Christmas Eve, in a snowstorm that was only getting worse. His hands clenched into fists, but he forced his voice to remain calm and gentle. "My name is Michael. What are your names?" "I'm Grace," said the braver one, still trembling. "This is my sister Faith." "Those are beautiful names. Listen, Grace, Faith, it's very, very cold out here, and it's not safe. How about you come sit in my warm truck while we figure out how to find your aunt?" The girls exchanged glances, and he could see the war between their desperation for warmth and the fear that had probably been drilled into them about strangers. He slowly pulled out his phone, showing them his lock screen, an old photo of him in his sheriff's deputy uniform. "I used to be a police officer," he said gently, kneeling down in the snow so he was at their eye level. "I promise I just want to help you get somewhere safe and warm. You must be so cold." Grace looked at her sister, seemed to make a decision that was far too heavy for someone so young, and nodded. Michael helped them into his truck, his heart breaking at how light they were, how their tiny bodies shook violently from the cold. He immediately cranked up the heat as high as it would go, and grabbed the emergency blanket from his glove compartment, wrapping it around both of them. They huddled together on the passenger seat like 2 birds seeking warmth. From his thermos, he poured hot chocolate into the lid, a habit from his patrol days, always having something warm on cold nights. "Here, this will help warm you up. Share it carefully, okay?"
As they sipped the hot chocolate, passing it between them with practiced fairness, Michael tried to piece together what kind of monster would abandon 2 children on a deserted road in a blizzard. "Can you tell me your aunt's name?" he asked, pulling out his phone to call for help, only to find no signal. The storm must have knocked out the nearest tower. "Aunt Carol," Grace said, her voice getting stronger as warmth returned to her body. But she's not really our aunt. She just told us to call her that." The story came out in fragments, each piece more heartbreaking than the last. Their mother, Angela, had died 6 months ago, a brain aneurysm that took her suddenly, leaving them orphaned. Their father had never been in the picture, having signed away his rights when they were babies. Since then, they'd been bounced between 3 different foster homes. "The first family was okay," Grace said, quietly, "but they said they couldn't keep us. The second one had too many kids already. And "Aunt Carol?" Michael asked gently, though he could already guess. Faith's small voice answered. "She didn't like us very much. She said we ate too much food. And we were too loud," Grace added, her protective instincts showing even now. "Even when we tried to be really, really quiet, even when we whispered." Michael's jaw tightened as he navigated the snowy roads toward town. He'd seen a lot during his years in law enforcement, but crimes against children had always been the hardest to stomach. And what else could you call this but a crime? "She got money for keeping us," Grace continued, wise beyond her years in the worst possible way. "We heard her on the phone. She said we weren't worth the check she got. This morning she put us in her car and drove us out here. She said our real family was coming to get us, that we just had to wait by the road and they'd find us." "But nobody came," Faith whispered, tears starting again. I thought maybe we were bad, and that was why nobody wanted us."
Michael had to take a deep breath to keep his voice steady. 3 years ago, he'd lost his own daughter Sophie and his wife Catherine in an accident. A delivery driver checking his phone had stolen his entire world in seconds. He thought he knew what heartbreak was, but seeing these two abandoned children opened up a different kind of wound entirely. "Listen to me, both of you," he said firmly. "You are not bad. What happened to you is not your fault. Adults are supposed to protect children, not hurt them. Your Aunt Carol did a very wrong thing, and I'm going to make sure she never does it to anyone else." The Millbrook police station was operating with a skeleton crew when they arrived. Deputy Janet Walker, whom Michael knew from his days on the force, looked up in surprise. "Michael, what brings you out in this storm?" Her eyes fell on the twins, who clung to each other. "And who were these sweethearts?" Michael explained the situation in clipped, professional tones, trying to keep his anger in check. With each detail, Janet's face darkened. She immediately started making calls, but the news wasn't good. "The roads are impassable in half the county," she said quietly to Michael while the girls played with a puzzle in the break room, seemingly just content to be warm and safe. "What about emergency foster families?" Janet shook her head. "All full. It's Christmas Eve, Michael. The only option tonight is the county shelter, but..." She didn't need to finish. They both knew what the county shelter was like on Christmas Eve. Overcrowded, chaotic, filled with adults struggling with their own demons. No place for two traumatized little girls who'd been failed by every adult in their lives except their late mother. Michael looked through the window at Grace and Faith. Grace was helping her sister with the puzzle, patient and protective, while Faith leaned against her, still recovering from their ordeal. Something in his chest, something that had been frozen solid for 3 years, cracked slightly.
The words came out before he could stop them. "I'll take them." Janet's eyebrows shot up. "Michael, I still have my foster certification from before. He'd gotten it years ago when he and Catherine had struggled to conceive, back when they thought fostering might be their path to parenthood. Then Sophie had come along, their miracle baby, and the certification had become irrelevant. He'd kept it current even after the accident, though he couldn't have said why. Maybe some part of him had known he'd need it someday." "Are you sure?" Janet asked softly. "I know Christmas is hard for you." "They need somewhere safe and warm tonight. I have space." If this story is touching your heart, remember to subscribe to hear more stories like this. Sometimes the families we find are the ones we never expected. The paperwork was expedited given the emergency circumstances. As Michael drove the girls to his house, he wondered what he was doing. For 3 years, he'd moved through his home like a ghost, maintaining it but not really living in it. Catherine's coffee mug still sat by the kitchen sink. Sophie's drawing still decorated the refrigerator. Her room remained exactly as she'd left it that last morning. "Is this your house?" Faith asked, as they pulled into the driveway of the 2-story colonial that had once been filled with laughter. "Yes, it is." "It's pretty," Grace said softly. "Like a house in a storybook. A happy house." Only if she knew, Michael thought. But he just nodded and helped them inside. He turned up the heat and showed them around, his footsteps echoing in rooms that had been silent for too long. When they reached the hallway upstairs, he paused at a door he hadn't opened in 2 years. Sophie's room. His hand trembled on the doorknob. Behind this door was a museum of his daughter's 6 years of life.
Every stuffed animal she'd loved, every book they'd read together, the walls still painted the soft pink she'd picked out for her 5th birthday. But these girls needed somewhere to sleep, and somehow Michael knew Sophie would want them to have it. He took a breath and turned the handle.
The room was exactly as Sophie had left it. Her favorite teddy bear sat on the pillow. Her drawings were still tacked to the bulletin board. The calendar on the wall was still turned to December 3rd, 3 years ago, with Christmas written in her shaky handwriting on the 25th, decorated with crayon stars. The twins stood in the doorway, uncertain. "Whose room is this?" Grace asked, always the one needing to understand everything. Michael was quiet for a long moment, his throat tight. "It belonged to my daughter. She's not here anymore." Faith, surprising him with her intuition, slipped her small hand into his. It was such a simple gesture, but it nearly undid him. "Is she in heaven with our mommy?" The innocent question, asked with such matter-of-fact acceptance of loss, broke something open in Michael's chest. "Yes," he managed. "I think they're probably friends up there. I think Sophie would be happy to know you're using her room." "What was she like?" Grace asked. "She was—" He had to stop and compose himself. "She was bright and funny. She loved to draw, just like you, Faith. And she was always asking questions about everything, like you, Grace. She would have liked you both very much." That evening, he made them grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, the only thing he could manage with his depleted pantry. He'd been surviving on frozen dinners and takeout for so long, he'd forgotten what it was like to cook for others. But the girls ate like it was a feast, thanking him with every bite. "At Aunt Carol's, we only got 1 meal a day," Faith said quietly. "She said we were too expensive to feed more than that." Michael's hands clenched around his coffee mug. He made them each another sandwich, without a word. He found some of Sophie's clothes that fit them well enough, pajamas with unicorns on them that made Faith smile for the first time, and a set with stars that Grace held like they were made of gold. While they changed, he started a load of laundry to clean their wet things, noticing how threadbare their coats were, how their shoes had holes that had been stuffed with newspaper to keep the snow out.
As bedtime approached, Grace asked hesitantly, "Mr. Michael, we don't have presents for tomorrow. Santa doesn't know we're here. He probably went to Aunt Carol's house, but we weren't good enough for her to keep us, so maybe we weren't good enough for presents either." The matter-of-fact way she said it, as if she'd already accepted that they didn't deserve good things, made Michael want to find this Carol woman and... He stopped himself. That wasn't what these girls needed from him. "You know what?" he said, kneeling down to their level. "Santa's very smart. Sometimes he leaves extra presents at people's houses, just in case someone special might need them. Why don't we check in the morning and see?" After they were asleep, curled up together in Sophie's bed like 2 kittens, Michael went to his garage. In the back corner, covered by a tarp and layers of dust, were the presents he'd bought for Sophie that last Christmas. He'd been shopping early, planning ahead as always, buying things for a slightly older child, books she'd grow into, art supplies for when her drawings became more sophisticated, a science kit for the questions she was always asking. He'd never been able to return them or donate them. They'd sat here for 3 years, waiting. Maybe somehow they'd been waiting for tonight. Michael brought them inside, dusted them off with shaking hands, and placed them under the tree he'd grudgingly put up only because his neighbor had insisted he couldn't let the holidays pass without at least trying. The tree looked less lonely with presents beneath it. He also called Janet, who promised to bring over some additional clothes and necessities in the morning, weather permitting. Then he did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He went to his bedroom, to the bed he'd shared with Catherine, instead of falling asleep in the recliner where he'd been spending his nights. He kept the door open, though, in case the girls needed him, in case they had nightmares about being abandoned again, in case they woke up frightened in a strange place. It was Faith's whimper that woke him at 3 a.m. He found her sitting up in bed, tears streaming down her face, while Grace tried to comfort her.
Hey, what's wrong?" Michael asked softly, sitting on the edge of the bed.
I dreamed we were back on the road," Faith sobbed, "and nobody came. Nobody ever came."
Michael gathered her into his arms, and Grace pressed against his other side. You're safe now. You're not on that road anymore. You're here, you're warm, and you're safe. But what if you decide you don't want us either? Grace asked in a small voice. What if we're too much trouble? Aunt Carol said nobody would want us because we're too much work. Michael felt his heart break all over again. How do you convince children who'd been thrown away that they were worth keeping? Listen to me, he said firmly. What Aunt Carol did was wrong. You are not too much trouble. You are not too much work. You are two brave, kind, smart little girls who deserve to be loved and protected. And as long as you need somewhere to stay, you're welcome here. Okay? They nodded against him, and he stayed there until they fell back asleep, standing guard against their nightmares the way he wished someone could have stood guard against his. Have you ever witnessed a moment when everything changes, when broken hearts begin to heal? Keep watching to see what Christmas morning brought. Morning came with whispers and giggles. Michael found them in the living room, staring at the presents under the tree with the kind of wonder he hadn't seen in 3 years. Santa found us, Faith exclaimed when she saw him. He knew we were here. He always does, Michael said, surprised to find himself smiling. It didn't hurt as much as he'd expected. The girls opened their presents with a joy that was infectious. Art supplies that made Faith squeal with delight, books that had Grace's eyes lighting up, a pair of dolls that they immediately decided were sisters, like us, board games they could play together, simple things that they treated like treasures. Grace carefully saved every piece of wrapping paper, smoothing it out and folding it neatly. We can use it to wrap presents for other people when we have presents to give someday. The optimism in that statement, the assumption that there would be a someday when they had enough to give to others, made him excuse himself to the kitchen where he could compose himself.
Janet arrived around noon with supplies and news. She pulled Michael aside while the girls were trying on the clothes she'd brought. Proper winter coats, boots without holes, warm sweaters in bright colors. "We found Carol Hutchins," she said quietly. "She's been arrested. She admitted to abandoning them, said she'd been planning it for weeks. She'd already told CPS that the girls had run away, was going to keep collecting the checks until someone figured it out. What happens to them now? Their case will be reviewed after the holidays, but Michael..." Janet paused. "They have no one. Their mother had no living relatives, and their father terminated his rights years ago. They'll go back into the system, probably be separated because most families don't want to take 2 kids at once." "No," Michael said firmly. "They stay together. That's not always possible. Then I'll keep them, both of them." Janet studied him carefully. "That's a big decision, Michael. You've been through a lot. So have they, and they've been through it alone. At least I had 3 good years with my family before I lost them. These girls have had nothing but loss and abandonment. They deserve better." Over the next few days, something shifted in Michael's house. It wasn't sudden or dramatic, healing never is, but slowly spaces that had been silent filled with sound again. Faith's drawings began appearing on the refrigerator next to Sophie's old ones. Grace's voice could be heard reading aloud from the books she was devouring. The kitchen table that had held nothing but mail and silence for 3 years became the site of meals and conversations and homework once school resumed. Michael found himself doing things he hadn't done in years, cooking real dinners, making packed lunches, checking closets for monsters. Though Grace insisted she was too old for that, she still looked relieved when he did it. Reading bedtime stories, with Faith always asking for just one more chapter, and Grace pretending she wasn't listening while hanging on every word. The girls had nightmares sometimes. Faith would dream about the cold, about waiting on that road forever. Grace would dream about being separated from her sister. But Michael was always there, ready with comfort and reassurance, standing guard against their fears the way parents should.
His grief counselor, whom he'd called for an emergency session, had asked him one simple question. Are you considering this because you miss having children, or because these specific children need you? The answer had come immediately. It wasn't about replacing Sophie. No one could ever do that. His daughter would always hold her unique place in his heart. This was about Grace and Faith, two little girls who carefully saved wrapping paper and said thank you for every meal. Two little girls who held each other through nightmares and shared everything equally without being asked. Two little girls who'd been failed by every adult in their lives except their late mother. Two little girls who deserved to know what it felt like to be chosen. On New Year's Eve, as they watched the ball drop on TV, recorded earlier because the girls couldn't stay up that late, Faith curled up against Michael's side. "Mr. Michael, are we going to have to leave?" Grace, on his other side, tensed slightly, waiting for the answer she'd been too afraid to ask. Michael had been wrestling with this decision all week, but sitting there with these two brave little souls who'd survived so much, the answer was clear. "No," he said firmly. "You're not going to have to leave. Not if you don't want to." "Really?" asked Grace, her voice small and hopeful. "Really. We'll make it official. Would you like to stay here, permanently? Become a family?" Faith threw her arms around him, and Grace quickly joined her. For the first time in 3 years, Michael felt something other than grief in his chest. Not happiness exactly. That would take time. But purpose. Hope. The possibility that broken hearts could still hold love. "We can be your daughters?" Faith asked. "Real daughters? Forever and ever?" "Forever and ever," Michael confirmed, holding them tighter. Sometimes, the most beautiful families are the ones we never expected. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. The adoption process took 6 months. There were home visits where the girls showed off their rooms. They'd kept Sophie's room but made it their own, with Faith's drawings and Grace's books mixing with Sophie's old things. There were court dates where they dressed in their best clothes and held Michael's hands so tightly his fingers went numb. There was paperwork that seemed endless, but Michael attacked it with the determination of a man who'd already lost one family and refused to lose another. Grace joined the school's reading club and came home bubbling with excitement about the stories she was discovering. Faith's art teacher said she had real talent and enrolled her in an after-school program. They both started calling him Dad by spring, naturally, without any discussion about it. Grace said it first, casually asking, "Dad, can you help me with my homework?" And Faith followed within hours. The first time it happened, Michael had to excuse himself again. But this time, the tears weren't just from grief. They were something more complicated. Joy and sorrow mixed together. The recognition that he could be a father again, without betraying the memory of the daughter he'd lost. Catherine's sister visited in the spring, worried about Michael taking on so much so soon. But when she saw him with the girls, helping Grace with a school project about the solar system, teaching Faith how to mix colors for the sunset she was painting, she understood. "They're not replacing Sophie," she said quietly. "No," Michael agreed. "They're not. Sophie is irreplaceable. But my heart, it's bigger than I thought. There's room for all of them." On the anniversary of the day he found them, the next Christmas Eve, they established a new tradition. They drove to the spot where he'd first seen them, but this time with a purpose. They'd installed a weatherproof box there, filled with blankets, hand warmers, non-perishable food, and a sign with Michael's phone number. "If you need help, you're not alone." Then they delivered presents to the shelter and served dinner at the community center. The girls insisted on giving away some of their own toys to children who had less, Grace carefully selecting books she thought others would love, Faith creating special drawings for each child. That night, as Michael tucked them in, they still shared Sophie's room by choice, saying they slept better together. Faith said something that stopped him in his tracks. "Daddy, I think Sophie sent us to you." Grace nodded solemnly. "So you wouldn't be alone on Christmas anymore. And so we wouldn't be alone either. She knew we needed each other." Michael kissed both their foreheads, unable to speak for a moment. "I think you might be right." "Is it okay that we talk about her?" Grace asked. "Does it make you too sad?" "No, sweetheart. It makes me happy that you want to know about her. She's part of our family story, just like your mom is. We can talk about them whenever you want." Later, standing in the doorway watching them sleep, Faith's hand reaching out even in sleep to make sure Grace was there, Grace's protective arm thrown over her sister, Michael whispered a thank you. To Catherine for teaching him how to love, to Sophie for showing him joy, to Angela, the girl's mother, for bringing these two precious souls into the world,
to whatever force had put him on that road at that exact moment. He thought about that night a year ago, the snow swirling, the hazard lights, two small figures in pink coats that were too thin for winter. He thought he was just taking his annual drive to nowhere, trying to escape his grief. Instead, he'd driven straight into a new chapter of his life. The twins hadn't replaced his lost family. They'd created a new one. Different, unexpected, but real and precious nonetheless. The hole in his heart would never fully heal. He knew that now. Catherine and Sophie would always be a part of him, always be missed, always be loved. But Grace and Faith had shown him that a broken heart could still love, still protect, still be a home for others who needed one. Love, he'd learned, wasn't a finite resource. It didn't run out. It grew to fill whatever space you gave it. 6 months after the adoption was finalized, Michael was going through some old boxes in the garage when Faith and Grace came running in. "Dad, Dad, look what we made at school!" It was Father's Day, and they'd made cards. Grace's was covered with carefully written words about how he'd saved them, how he'd chosen them, how he was the best dad in the world. Faith's was covered with drawings, their family, including a little angel she'd labeled Sophie, watching over them. But it was what Faith said next that truly undid him. "Our teacher asked us to write about our heroes. I wrote about you, because you didn't just save us from the cold that night. You saved us from being alone forever." Grace added quietly, "You gave us a family when everyone else gave up on us. You're not just our dad, you're our hero." Michael pulled them both into his arms, thinking about the journey that had brought them here. 3 broken hearts that had found each other in the snow. 3 souls who'd learned that families aren't always born. Sometimes they're found on the side of the road on Christmas Eve, waiting to be claimed, waiting to be loved, waiting to come home. "You saved me too," he told them. "You two saved me too." And in that garage, surrounded by boxes of memories, both painful and precious, a father and his daughters held each other tight. A family forged, not by blood, but by choice, by love, by the simple act of refusing to let go. Sometimes the greatest gifts come in the most unexpected packages. Sometimes they're wearing pink coats that are too thin for winter. Sometimes they're holding hands in the snow, waiting for someone to stop, to see them, to choose them. Sometimes miracles look like 2 little girls who need a home and a broken-hearted man who needs a reason to heal. Michael had found his reason. Grace and Faith had found their home. And together they'd found that love doesn't divide when you share it. It multiplies. It grows. It heals. It transforms 2 abandoned girls and 1 grieving father into something beautiful, something whole, something worth fighting for. A family. The truth that had stunned Michael that Christmas Eve wasn't just that someone could abandon 2 innocent children. It was that in finding them, in saving them, they had saved him right back. They'd given him purpose when he'd lost his way. They'd given him love when his heart felt empty. They'd given him a future when he could only see the past.
If this story touched your heart, don't leave silently. Subscribe to Souls Connecting Tales and stay with us for more moments that remind us what it means to be human. Leave a comment and share your thoughts. Your words might comfort someone who needs them more than you know. And if you felt even a spark of hope today, give this video a like, because sometimes a small act of support can change everything.